The rejection email arrived at 3:17 a.m. Marcus Bell saw it because he was still awake, sitting on the floor of his studio apartment with his back against the radiator, charcoal dust on his hands and paint under his fingernails. The city outside his window never really slept, but at that hour it breathed differently, slower, heavier, like it was deciding what kind of day it wanted to become. The subject line was polite. "Thank you for your submission." Marcus didn't open it right away. He already knew what it would say. The Harrison and Cole Gallery was one of the most respected contemporary spaces in the city. Clean white walls, serious collectors, critics who spoke in complete sentences and decided careers with a paragraph. Marcus had spent weeks preparing his submission, photographing each piece in natural light, writing an artist statement that didn't sound like it was trying too hard, choosing works that felt honest rather than impressive. He had followed every rule. That was probably the problem. When he finally opened the email, the words were exactly as expected. "While your work shows promise, it does not align with our current curatorial direction. We encourage you to continue developing your voice." Marcus exhaled slowly. Promise, not aligned. Developing your voice. Phrases that sounded generous but landed like dismissal. He closed the laptop and stared at the wall opposite him, where 3 unfinished canvases leaned against peeling paint. Faces stared back at him, fragmented, layered, unfinished on purpose. They weren't pretty, they weren't decorative. They told stories Marcus had grown up inside but rarely saw hanging in clean rooms with wine glasses and price tags. He was black, 29, self-taught, and invisible to the kind of art world that liked its rebellion safely framed. Marcus didn't come from art school critiques or residency programs. He came from sketching on grocery receipts while riding the bus, from copying album covers by hand because he couldn't afford prints, from watching neighborhoods change faster than the people living in them could keep up. His work wasn't subtle, it wasn't meant to be. At 6 a.m., Marcus carried 2 canvases down 4 flights of stairs and out into the street. He loaded them carefully into the back of his beat-up hatchback, wrapping them in old sheets. Today wasn't about galleries. Today was about walls. The building on the corner of 9th and Monroe had been empty for years. Boarded windows, cracked brick. It was scheduled for demolition, but no one seemed in a hurry. Marcus had painted there before, small pieces, quick ones. This time he brought ladders. He worked as the sun came up, the sky shifting from grey to pale gold. People slowed as they passed. Some watched for a moment, then kept going. Others stopped. "What's it going to be?" someone asked. Marcus didn't answer. He rarely did. He sketched directly onto the brick, charcoal leaving rough lines that refused to be neat. Then paint. Thick, textured, colours that didn't apologize. Faces emerged, overlapping generations. Grief and joy tangled together, eyes that looked straight out at the street instead of past it. By midday, a small crowd had formed. Phones came out. Someone brought him water. A kid asked if he could help. Marcus handed him a brush without hesitation. By the time the piece was finished, it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. It was alive. That night, photos of the mural spread online. No hashtags at first. No captions explaining meaning. Just the image, shared and reshared by people who felt seen without being told why. Marcus sat on his apartment floor again, phone buzzing non-stop now, the rejection email forgotten. The gallery had turned him away, but the street hadn't asked for permission. And somewhere between brick and paint, between rejection and refusal, Marcus understood something with sudden clarity. If the gatekeepers couldn't recognize his work, it wasn't because it lacked value. It was because it didn't need their approval to move people. They had rejected an unknown artist. They had no idea his work was already redefining the movement they thought they controlled. By the end of the week, Marcus's mural had a name, though he hadn't given it one. People did. Someone called it The Remembering. Another called it Us Before They Erase Us. A local blog referred to it simply as The Wall on Monroe. Whatever the name, the image travelled faster than Marcus ever had. It showed up on timelines, in group chats, on the phones of people who hadn't walked that block in years, but suddenly felt pulled back to it. Marcus watched it all with a kind of wary distance. Attention had teeth. He'd learned that early. On the third day, the city arrived. 2 officials in reflective vests stood across the street, clipboards in hand, staring up at the mural like it was a problem that hadn't existed until someone named it. Marcus was touching up a section near the bottom when one of them cleared his throat loudly. "Sir," the man called out, "do you have a permit for this work?" Marcus climbed down the ladder slowly. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at them. "No," he said. The man nodded as if that settled something. "Then this is unauthorized public art. It's subject to removal." A small group had gathered nearby. Someone muttered, "Here we go." A woman folded her arms. The kid who'd helped paint earlier looked at Marcus, worried. Marcus didn't argue. He looked at the wall, then back at the officials. "When?" he asked. The woman with the clipboard hesitated. "Soon," she said. "We'll be in touch." They left without asking his name. That night, someone tagged the corner of the mural with a crude symbol. Not large, just enough to mark territory. Marcus found it early the next morning, paint still faintly wet. He stood there for a long time, staring at the defacement. Anger came and went like a wave. Then something else settled in its place. Marcus painted over it, but not to erase it. He folded the mark into the piece, reshaping it into a crack in the image, a scar that made the faces feel more real. By the time he finished, the damage looked intentional, necessary even. People noticed. "Don't touch that wall," someone said loudly as a group of teenagers passed by later that day. "That's art." The phrase caught on. 2 blocks away, another building owner taped a handwritten note to his door. "If you want to paint this wall, you can." Marcus didn't respond publicly. He just showed up. Over the next 2 weeks, more walls followed. Not sponsored, not curated. Chosen by handshakes and quiet permission. Marcus painted late into the night, sometimes alone, sometimes with a rotating group of neighbours who brought ladders, music, food. Kids mixed colours. Elders told stories that found their way into faces and gestures on brick. The work evolved, it got bolder, less singular, more collective. Meanwhile, the gallery world stirred. A mid-level curator sent Marcus a message asking if he'd consider translating his street aesthetic into a controlled exhibition format. A critic wrote a cautious paragraph describing the murals as raw but undisciplined. Another called them political without sophistication. Marcus didn't reply. He was busy. One afternoon, he received another email from Harrison and Cole Gallery. The tone had changed. They referenced recent developments, mentioned public response, suggested a meeting to revisit alignment. Marcus read it once, then closed his laptop. That same night, he stood in front of a new wall, a massive one near the old train tracks, and realized he could no longer see where his work ended and the neighborhood began. The murals had become landmarks. Directions were given using them. Turn left at Marcus's wall. Meet me by the faces near the tracks. He hadn't planned this. He hadn't controlled it, which meant it was real. As Marcus packed up his brushes, a woman approached him quietly. She introduced herself as a professor from a nearby art school. She didn't mention galleries. She didn't mention exposure. She said, "What you're doing is changing how my students think about where art belongs." Marcus nodded. "Good," he said. Because the movement he was part of wasn't asking to be included, it was already moving. The gallery had rejected an unknown artist, assuming the story would end there. Instead, it had slipped out of their walls, onto the streets, into the hands of people who never waited for permission. And in doing so, Marcus's work was no longer just being seen. It was redefining what the movement was, who it was for, and where it could live. By the time the first article ran in a national magazine, Marcus was already exhausted, not from the painting, but from the translation. The article tried to explain his work in a language that felt foreign to it. It spoke about urban expression and post-institutional resistance, about liminal spaces and aesthetic reclamation. It quoted critics who had never stood in front of the wall for more than 5 minutes. It framed Marcus as a symbol before understanding him as a person. He read the piece twice, then put the magazine down. Outside, the city was responding in ways no article could capture. Someone left flowers at the base of one mural after a neighborhood shooting. Another wall became a meeting point for organizers planning a tenant protest. A teacher brought her class to sit on the curb and write about what they saw. None of that fit into a clean paragraph. Marcus kept painting. But pressure was building. The city posted a formal notice on one of the walls, printed and taped at eye level. Unauthorized artwork subject to removal. Someone tore it down within an hour. It reappeared the next day. This time, people painted around it, framing the notice instead of erasing it, turning bureaucracy into part of the composition. That irritated the wrong people. Marcus was painting near the tracks one evening when 2 police officers approached. They didn't shout, they didn't rush, they stood just close enough to be felt. "You the one doing these?" one asked. Marcus nodded. "Some of them." "You got permits?" "No." The officer sighed, like this was an inconvenience rather than a confrontation. "You know this can't keep going like this." Marcus looked past them at the wall, half-finished, a face emerging from layers of colour, eyes still unformed. "It already has," he said. They told him to pack up. He did. Calmly. He carried his supplies to his car while neighbours watched from stoops and windows. No one intervened. Not yet. The next morning, photos circulated online. The unfinished face, the empty wall. Captions filled in the rest. They stopped him. City silencing art again. Why do they only see value once it's gone? By noon, the pressure flipped. A council member released a statement praising the importance of creative expression while reminding the public of necessary regulations. A gallery director tweeted about the need to protect emerging voices. Everyone wanted proximity without responsibility. Marcus wanted none of it. He received an invitation to participate in a panel discussion on the future of contemporary art. He ignored it. Another email offered a sponsored mural, with brand guidelines attached. He deleted it. Then came the call that made him stop. A collective of artists, older ones, many of them black and brown, some of them names Marcus recognized, asked him to meet. No press, no institutions, just a conversation. They gathered in a borrowed community space with folding chairs and chipped paint on the walls. No one moderated, no one pitched. They asked Marcus what he wanted. The question caught him off guard. "I want the work to stay honest," he said finally. "I don't want it to get polite." An older woman nodded. "Then you need to decide who gets to touch it." That stayed with him. Over the next month, Marcus made a choice that surprised people. He stopped painting alone. Instead, he organized open paint days. Not workshops, not classes, invitations. People came with no experience, no credentials. He sketched the foundation, then stepped back. Others filled in. The walls became layered with many hands, many styles, many voices. Critics struggled with that. They asked who the real artist was, who owned the work, who deserved credit. Marcus answered once, publicly, just once. "If you need a single name to understand it," he said, "you're missing the point." The movement grew messier, harder to sell, impossible to frame neatly, which made it stronger. Then the gallery reached out again, this time not with an email, but with a representative who showed up in person while Marcus was painting. She stood quietly until he noticed her. "We'd like to offer you a solo show," she said. Full creative control. Marcus studied her face. "Why now?" She didn't pretend. "Because what you're doing is influencing everything." He nodded slowly. "I'll consider it," he said. "On one condition." She leaned in. "Name it." "The walls come with me," Marcus said. "Not photos, not recreations, the actual surfaces, or the people who painted them. She blinked. That's not how galleries work. Marcus smiled faintly. Then it's not a gallery show. She left without answering. Weeks passed. The city quietly halted removal orders. Property owners began protecting murals with sealant and lights. Art students stopped asking how to get into galleries and started asking how to listen better. And somewhere in a boardroom with white walls and controlled lighting, the gallery realized something too late. They hadn't just rejected an artist, they had rejected a shift, a movement that no longer needed their approval to exist and would redefine them whether they liked it or not. The opening happened without a ribbon. No speeches, no champagne, no donors crowding the door. The gallery removed one entire wall, brick, plaster, layers of old paint still clinging to it, and installed it exactly as it had stood on Monroe Street, cracks intact, chips visible, names etched faintly near the bottom where people had signed it without asking. Visitors didn't walk in at first. They stopped. The room felt wrong to them, unfinished, uneven, too alive for a space that usually smelled like restraint. There were no placards explaining meaning, no artist statement printed in elegant type, just the wall, standing there like it had been interrupted mid-sentence. And around it, people, not actors, not docents, the actual neighbours. Some had paint still under their nails. They stood beside the wall they'd helped create, answering questions when they felt like it, staying silent when they didn't. They talked about eviction notices, about block parties, about why a face had been painted larger than life instead of framed small. Marcus stayed in the back. He watched collectors shift uncomfortably, watched critics realize they couldn't separate the work from the people without breaking it, watched students understand in real time that art wasn't something you applied for, it was something you built where you stood. Reviews came out fast. Some praised the show as radical, others called it undisciplined. One critic complained that it was difficult to assign authorship. Marcus smiled when he read that. That was the point. Outside the gallery, the movement kept growing. New walls appeared in other cities, painted by people who had never met Marcus, who didn't wait for permission, who weren't interested in translating themselves into acceptable language. The style spread, then fractured, then evolved. That was how movements survived. Art schools updated syllabi. Galleries revised criteria. Institutions began chasing something they could no longer define. Marcus declined interviews. He kept painting when it made sense, stepped back when it didn't. He learned when to protect the work and when to let it belong fully to others. Years later, students would talk about a moment when contemporary art stopped asking where it was allowed to exist. They would point to Marcus's work, not as a beginning, but as a signal. The moment the gallery rejected an unknown artist because he didn't fit their direction, and unknowingly freed him to help redefine an entire movement that no longer needed walls, approval, or silence to survive. Marcus never framed the rejection email. He deleted it, because the only proof that mattered was still out there, breathing on brick, changing with the city, and reminding anyone willing to look long enough of a truth the gatekeepers learned too late. Art doesn't wait to be chosen. It moves. And when it does, everything else has to follow.